Bentley 1997 suggests that creativity is the making of the new and the rearranging of the old. Therefore, for my A2 Media coursework, I produced a new local newspaper called Chapeltown Observer. By researching other real media newspapers such as The Star, I could follow the conventions and enhance the verisimilitude of my product. To make my newspaper look as professional and realistic as possible, I followed the real conventions of real newspapers in the media. In the real media product Sheffield Star, the newspaper contains articles and stories in Sheffield to denote that it is a local newspaper. Tim O'Sullivan suggests that every media tells some sort of story. Therefore, in my product, the Chapeltown Observer, I encoded articles and stories happening in Chapeltown to reinforce the ideology that the genre of my newspaper is local and to keep it relevant to my local area. Umberto Eco 1981 states that text can have an open or a closed meaning. An open meaning is ambiguous and not easy for the audience to understand, whereas a closed meaning is easy to understand. My newspaper is aimed at an age range of 16 to 26-year-olds. Therefore, I encoded my text with a closed meaning so that people with different levels of reading skills can understand it. After all, David Gauntlet suggests that this particular understanding of creativity involves the physical making of something leading to some form of communication, expression, or elevation. Therefore, what is the point of creating something if no one can understand it? Which is why I took mode of address into consideration, so I have followed the real conventions of local newspapers. In my newspaper, I also developed and challenged conventions of real media newspapers. In real local newspapers such as the Sheffield Star, Look Local and Rotherham Leader, the papers cover stories and articles in a variety of areas, such as Chapeltown, High Green, Ecclesfield, Thorpe Hesley, Rotherham, etc. However, I decided that in my newspaper I will cover stories in a more specific area, Chapeltown. This is because I would find it easier to target audiences in Chapeltown because I could find the stories out myself because I live there. Therefore, I came to the conclusion that there will be room in the market for my newspaper because it targets a more specific area. For example, the article on the reconstruction of Chapeltown Park will mainly appeal to audiences in Chapeltown. McQuail 1972 suggests that audiences can be described as a temporary collective, meaning that a group of people can share a same interest. I took this into consideration when I planned my local newspaper and to decide who my target audience is. Ang 1991 detailed that media producers have an imaginary entity in mind before the construction of a media product. So, I decided that my target audience would be the residents of Chapeltown. This was easier for me because I have more knowledge on the area because I live there, rather than covering a broad area. To decide the age range of my target audience, I used JitCraig data. I simply had to type in JitCraig on the internet, type in my location and what I want to search, and it would come up with the data for different newspapers and their target audiences. I also used information from the National Readership Survey in order to help me come up with a demographic audience. I decided that my target audience would be similar to the real local newspaper that already exists in my local area. Therefore, my target audience is 16 to 26-year-olds, similar to the Sheffield Star. Therefore, I could target my audience to a specific newspaper through the articles I encode, i.e. local band performance. This suggests that I have followed the conventions of real local newspapers. My newspaper is a niche, therefore the circulation and readership figures would be small compared to mass newspapers such as the Star. I would advertise my local area with 2 ancillary products, a poster and a radio trailer. Chapeltown Observer would be published by Sheffield Newspapers, owned by Johnston Press, a newspaper publisher. I would use this company because it is a local publisher for other competitive newspapers in the market, such as the Sheffield Star and Yorkshire Post. Therefore, this would ensure I reach my audience effectively. To ensure that I was following conventions of real local newspapers, I replicated a copy of the Sheffield Star. I copied the layout of the newspaper so that I knew where to put photos and texts. I also measured the size of the text in the articles and used unitarium to convert the measurement into pt. This reinforced that I use conventions of real newspapers in my local newspaper, because I use the same font. Roland Barthes 1997 suggests that all photographs are anchored in newspapers via captions. In the current local newspaper in my area, the Sheffield Star, the newspaper anchors photographs like this. In my newspaper, I anchor photographs like this, and therefore I have reinforced my work with real conventions. Whilst taking my photographs, I use mise-en-scène to help me create meaning through linguistic and graphic images. Jonathan Bignell 1997. For example, I use the rule of thirds, John Thomas Smith, i.e. the photograph anchored with the We Will Rock You article. A low-angled shot of the model connotes power, whilst the long shot of the Chapeltown Park establishes the location and mise-en-scène in the photograph. Therefore, I have followed the conventions of real local newspapers. Charles Sanders Peirce, 1931, suggests that we only think in signs. Signs can take forms of words, images, etc., but only become signs when we invest them with meaning or someone interprets it as signifying something. So, I encoded language in my local newspaper to create meaning and representations, Richard Dyer 1983, for my target audience to decode. We call these languages because they are familiar codes and conventions that are generally understood. To follow the conventions of real media newspapers, I encoded advertisements to represent an aspirational lifestyle or desire. Also, the advertisements are only from local businesses in the area, therefore only appeal to my target audience and enhances that my local newspaper is local. For example, the offer to stay in Jopp Lodge restaurant in Chapeltown, and so everyone who consumes the newspaper will know it. To give meaning to my photographs, I anchored them with captions to denote their meaning. For example, the photograph on the front cover is of a girl posing with her arm in the air. It isn't till I anchor a caption with the photograph that the audience will know that the girl is a pupil at Ecclesfield School who is performing in a musical production of We Will Rock You. Therefore, I use language to encode meaning to my photographs, a convention in real media text.